students take the bar, they go on a bar trip, often to a resort in Mexico or Hawaii. For my bar trip, I decided I wanted to go to Burning Man. Burning Man is a week-long festival in the desert that describes itself as an experiment in community art, radical self-expression, and radical self-reliance. Most law students don't really know that many burners. So if I went, I was going to be doing it alone. I was 6 months into dating my boyfriend and was completely head over heels in love with him. But he had taken me on a romantic bar trip, and he couldn't also take more time off for Burning Man. So because I had to do it alone, I wanted to be smart about how I did it. Because even though the point of Burning Man was to be off the grid and self-reliant, I'm the kind of girl that likes being on the grid. And I don't really see the big deal about being reliant. I also knew a big part of the experience was being on drugs. And I wanted to have a when in Rome attitude about the whole thing. But it's not that easy to just casually ask your therapist if there would be complications, if you're on antidepressants, and you just want to experiment with illegal psychotropic substances for a week in the middle of class. So I never did ask. And sure, that meant I was a little scared of dying, but what I was much more scared of was being exposed. Exposed as some jappy lawyer from the suburbs while all these naked burners with crazy wigs pointed and laughed, like I was the awkward teenager in the cafeteria. But I was determined to confront my deep, dark fear, the fear that I was just another yuppie, and experience the burn. I would just be a smart burner. A burner who made good choices and constantly stayed hydrated. I found out an old Northwestern friend went to Burning Man every year with a camp of PhD candidates from MIT who had built luxury infrastructure like a solar-powered shower, and I knew that was where I belonged. So not long after, I paid my camp dues and was driving an RV for the first time, hitching a ride to Black Rock City to meet my camp. When I got there, I immediately had anxiety over how naked I was supposed to be. A lot of people walk around completely naked, and the ones who aren't are in elaborate raver costumes. I had brought my best costumes, which were old ballet tutus and my point shoes, but I kind of just wanted to wear shorts and a tank top. So I did, but I felt like everyone was staring at me for having too many clothes on. So I was constantly doing this thing where I would start to lift my shirt off and see how I felt in just a bra. And sometimes I'd go for it and take it off, but more often I'd get nervous and bring it down. So basically, in a crowd of naked people, I was the girl flashing my bra. Now, when you arrive, they give you this booklet of all the different activities going on at the camps. Like when you check into the Four Seasons, and you get an activities list of yoga classes and nature walks. And at first I tried everything. I learned which camp had the best food and live sex shows. I got lessons in rock climbing, moon bouncing, acrobatic yoga, making my own kombucha, and how to properly tie up your partner for bondage play. I would feel so proud when they would throw out a question and I'd say, I know, that's the zip snare and dragonfly sleeve knot. That was about when I discovered that many of the people at my camp were polyamorous and had met in a polyamorous group. And that suddenly seemed to explain all the back rubs I had been getting. Everyone knew I had a boyfriend, but I didn't let them know that he was a Republican-leaning Wall Street guy, and that he had corrected me when I said he was a banker, because that only applies to investment banking, and he worked in private equity, which meant he was really a financier. So it wasn't long before I found myself in an argument, sticking up for monogamy and sounding pretty defensive. Now, during the difficult years I had spent single previously, I'd often wondered to my friends if my desire for true love with my soulmate was as unrealistic as my believing in unicorns, which I'm pretty sure are just horses from space. But no matter how ridiculous I sounded, I had never been able to give up on either one. So when my camp started arguing that men couldn't be monogamous, I said, I don't care if it's as rare as unicorns, I still believe. So now I was the jappy lawyer who believed in unicorns. I started to worry my camp was going to exile me into one of the unaffiliated camps, which would be like going from a Four Seasons to an Econo Lodge in Bakersfield. Although I knew I was never going to bond with them on the sex stuff, I thought I could at least bond with them on the drugs because I was going to be daring. I was excited to see heroin and meth for the first time, and I was hoping I would finally find out what quaaludes really are. But most people just alternated between doing acid one day and mushrooms the next, or if they were very enterprising, acid in the morning and mushrooms in the afternoon, and of course weed, MDMA, and alcohol on top of it all. So at every meal, I had been doing this thing where I would secretly split up my acid or mushroom portions into quarters and just do a quarter at a time. I was pretty convinced it was going to be hard to overdose if you just did a quarter of what everyone else was doing. But the second to last night, my camp realized I wasn't taking my full portion, and they started to really lay into me. Except for one girl. She hugged me, told me it was okay if I was sober, and then she leaned in really close to my face, close enough to kiss me, and she said there were other ways to experience the burn. Basically, I had to either spend that night at my camp having my first orgy in a dragonfly sleeve knot, or go out with the group and do drugs. So obviously, I grabbed the mushrooms from the guy's hand and chomped them down. It was much later that I found out there had been way more than one portion in his hand. So pretty quickly, I noticed I was pretty happy. Actually, I was happier than I had ever been before in my entire life, and I kept thinking about how I had the best boyfriend in the universe. Mushrooms really increase your use of superlatives. Anyway, my camp hopped on an art car, and we were off to watch the Trojan horse burn. Somehow, when you're so high on mushrooms that you end up explaining all your psychological theories on pubic hair, it really starts to endear you to other burners. So at exactly midnight when the ceremony began, I was feeling like the most popular burner at all of Burning Man. The first sparks started to fly off the horse, and we were so close we could feel the heat on our faces. It began slowly with little fireworks, and soon sparklers were shooting from the horse's mane, and then with a huge burst of a giant fire cloud, the entire horse was engulfed in one massive flaming fireball. But the large flame cloud then receded, and what was left was the entire 60-foot tall horse on fire. She looked like she was galloping away into black smoke. It was one of the most spectacular things I had ever seen in my entire life. I stared at the horse in the middle of the playa, and that's when I see it's not a horse. A massive unicorn is staring back at me, on fire and galloping toward me. I start crying, and I tell the guy next to me that unicorns really do exist. This required some expounding upon, and he and I get to talking. It turns out he's a nice suburban Jewish dad who works at Microsoft, happily married and in a monogamous relationship. I tell him about my boyfriend of just a few months, and he asks, "Is he your beshert?" When you are tripping out of your mind at Burning Man, it's always weird to hear Yiddish terms that you've learned from your grandmother. Beshert is the Jewish term for the person God has essentially chosen ahead of time for you. Basically, it's a soulmate. So I look back at my unicorn galloping and say, yes, he's my beshert. Later that night, after stopping at a bondage show, I ended up at this camp that is essentially a gay bar. They had built a massive platform on which stands a huge door. And all night, people open the door, walk through, and announce that they're out and gay, or out and bi, or out and in love with 3 people. I'm feeling so ebullient and euphoric, I get in line to walk through the door, even though I have no idea what I'm going to say. I was staring down at hundreds of people, and I imagine saying something that will make everyone cheer, and it'll basically crowd surf off the platform. At this point, I was half convinced I could probably fly off the platform. When my turn comes, I throw open the door, I storm through, and scream as loudly as I can in the middle of the playa, "I'm coming out! I'm going to marry a banker." Then there's a pause for a second, then there is a roar from the crowd. Everyone is cheering for me, and I come down and they are hugging me, and I realize me, the jappy girl from the suburbs who asked if I could get the New York Times delivered to Black Rock City, me, a lawyer in love with a banker, I am a burner.